18 minutes.
18 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Approximately.
So the top speed and the way back we saw was a little faster, but it actually took a little longer to make the return trip. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay.
And you're referring to the same drive to Alameda and back? Okay.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
Are you aware that Senior Special Agent David Owen did a test drive from Alameda to Moselle on January 3rd of this year?
That's correct. I was in the passenger seat of that.
And how long did that take?
I would have to see the data. I don't remember.
You don't have that? You don't know if it was 17 minutes and 35 seconds?
If I was presented with something, it could be, but I do not have that number in front of me.
If it were that, it would be right in between those two times that we just saw for Mr. Murdaugh going back and forth, would it not?
It could, but there was different variables at the time.
It was during the day, wasn't it?
It was. It was.
So on this way back, there's that little 80-mile-an-hour spurt. How long did that go on?
I am unsure of that. It's just the data point is plotted. It doesn't give a. It just gives you a timestamp. It doesn't say for how long.
In your experience, I think you talked earlier that you would respond to calls in a marked car with blue lights.
Not a marked car, but an unmarked car with blue lights. Yep.
Is it extremely unusual for someone who's on a straightaway in a rural road at night to give it some gas on a little burst?
A little bit of gas, but when it's 55 and you have deer and other environmental factors that play in.
Yes, but it's not that unusual, is it, for someone to give it a little gas on a straightaway in a rural road?
It depends on what a little gas is.
But the overall speed that he went to get from where he was going, coming from to where he's going to, as far as you know, is in line with the test drive that you were in the passenger seat for?
If that is correct, what you mentioned, yes.
It's like right in between those two, actually.
Like I said, I don't have that test drive data in front of me, but.
Well, let's move on then to when he drove past that point where Maggie's cell phone was later recovered. And I think that may start on slide 23.
23?
Actually, if you go back one slide. Right. So we're on slide 22, sorry.
22? Okay.
So he's going 37.2 miles an hour here?
That's correct.
And next slide. Now he's still approaching it at 42, so he's accelerating gently. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Next slide. Looks like he is just past it, going slightly faster than he was on the previous slide. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Next slide. He's continuing to, now he's a good bit down the road there at 45, but is it fair to say he's continuing a fairly gentle acceleration?
I would say so, yes.
So what we saw as he passed it, he did not slow down and speed up as he went past that point. He continued his same gentle acceleration?
Per the data, yes.
And we won't go through it, but if we went down later to when it goes down to the bottom of the screen, it would show that he slowed down slightly, corresponding when he sent that text, "Go to see him, be right back." Is that accurate?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. We'll be done with that. I'm going to now just skip with this data all the way to when he approaches the kennel coming from the house right before he calls 911.
Okay.
The direction he is driving as he comes right up, right before he parks, would he be illuminating the bodies of Maggie and Paul?
Per the aerial that I'm looking, I don't know if you want to put it on the screen so we can show, but per the aerial, it would be coming around that curve and it would illuminate at least Maggie's body.
Would the illumination, is it going back towards that space between the barn and the kennels where Paul's body was out?
Like I said, this is just a data plot. you
But
know.
you could determine that, could you not, from just the last 2 points, because that would show you the direction that the vehicle is pointed.
It doesn't say the vehicle's pointed that direction, it just says that's
But
where
if
the
it moved
vehicle's
from
at.
point A to point B, being a car, it would have to be in
Yeah,
that
but where
direction.
where it final rests, I don't know which direction it's
But
pointing.
as it's moving,
As it's moving, yes, you would think it would go
right,
that
so,
direction.
so the headlight's certainly on Maggie, it would appear from the plot maybe on Paul as well. And does he park near Maggie's body?
I do not know where he parked the first time, because all we have is when the deputies arrived the second time. So
On your plot,
on the plot here,
when he comes the first time before the 911 call, where does his vehicle stop in relation to Maggie's body?
it stops before it.
How close is it?
I do not have a.
Descriptive, is it very close? Is it pretty much right there?
I wouldn't say it's right on top of it, but it's
Very
in
close.
the area.
So as he's pulling up to the scene, he can certainly see one, if not both, bodies on the ground, and he stops right next to Maggie. Is that fair?
I'm just looking at the data provided. I was not there on scene.
Well, the data provided is the
what he
location of
saw.
the car and the location of the body.
But I don't know
correct?
what he would have saw or what the car would have saw at that time.
You don't know what would be directly in front of his car as it was moving from point to point to point?
I was not out there.
You don't know which direction the car would be pointing as it moved
We know
from
which direction
point
the
to
car would
point
be
to point?
pointing, but what he saw or what the final
Well,
resting
forget
place
what
of
he
the
saw.
car is.
Is the car's headlights pointing at the bodies as he's pulling up?
I cannot give a definitive answer on that because I was not there, and the data I have.
I'm asking from the data.
The
Obviously
data
you
does
weren't
not
there.
say.
Allowed to finish this answer?
You must give the witness an opportunity to respond fully. You may proceed.
There is no data that says that the headlights were pointing in a specific direction or at a specific object, so I cannot answer that.
When you say there's no data saying the headlights are pointing in a specific direction, were they not pointed along the line that would connect the last two data points before the car stops and goes in the park?
For the drive, but it does not show. I mean, it could be at an angle. It's such a little dot, but does not show a vehicle in its exact position of it. So I cannot answer that.
Right, and we're not talking about the dot, we're talking about a line connecting two dots.
Okay, but
And
you
a
were
car
asking about
moving
the
along
dot.
that line, the headlines would be pointed down the line, correct?
Objection asked and answered.
Objections overruled.
Ask your question again.
We're talking not about a point, but about a line, and
Mm-hmm.
a car moving down a line. As it moves down that line between 2 points, would its headlights not be pointed in the same direction down that line?
I would assume.
So he arrives at the scene, gets out, presumably he goes in the park, and then 20 seconds later, first dials 911. Is that your testimony?
Yep.
So pulling up on the scene, body's in his headlight, presumably knows something's horribly wrong, gets out 20 seconds to the first call to 911. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Which was actually misdialed 9111, and he had to redial it a second time, which was at 18 seconds, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So he had 20 seconds, and I think there's maybe an implication, or that's not enough time.
Objection to the form, Your Honor.
Objection is sustained to the comment of counsel.
Sir, may I approach? Is this timer set for 20 seconds?
It is.
Okay. When I say so, would you please press the start button?
Okay.
Now. That was 20 seconds, would you agree?
Per your phone, yes.
You don't dispute the phone
I do not.
accuracy, do you? If the person getting out of the car had seen the bodies already and already knew something is horribly wrong, do you believe that that is an unreasonably short period of time to inspect and call 911?
I'm here to testify on this data, not the hypothetical. I think you're asking the wrong person on that.
Fair enough. We'll move on. Okay, I'm going to turn to your condensed timeline,
Okay.
which I think is State's Exhibit 519. I'm going to ask you to turn to page 21.
Okay.
And towards the bottom, 9:06 and 20 seconds, it says Maggie Murdaugh's iPhone sideways orientation,
That is correct.
and meaning that her phone at that time went to a sideways orientation.
So between 9:06:12 and 9:06:20, from the phone experts, that it started at 9:06:12 and it ended at 9:06:20.
Okay,
Those two orientations.
I'll ask it this way.
Okay.
A second later, what would be the orientation of her phone?
From a second from what? The 20?
After that, yes, at 9:06:21.
I do not know.
Well, then what does this entry mean? If it doesn't mean that it,
There's nothing that says 9:06:21 on here.
right, so what happened at 9:06 and 20 seconds?
It finished its orientation change to sideways.
What does that mean?
So it went from a portrait.
Mhm.
So let me get the phone. So it went from portrait to sideways.
And until,
In those between the
Go ahead, sorry.
between 9:06:12 and 9:06:20 is that is what it's showing. That's why we have the little purple on the right hand side to show that it's connected. It's all one big sequence. Per our phone experts that had previously testified.
so it would remain in portrait until remain in the landscape orientation until the next change?
I am unsure of that. I'm not a phone expert, so I am unsure of that. I was given this data, and this is how it was relayed to me, and this is how I have put it in this timeline.
Okay. So if you were to go to page 19, please.
Okay.
And the very last entry there, Maggie Murdaugh's iPhone vertical orientation.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
So this was all given to me from different, data sources. So how I read this is that the phone has turned to a vertical orientation. So I guess
Has turned to a vertical orientation. And
because we have a sideways orientation and then we have a vertical orientation.
Okay. Just keep scanning down until you get to the next orientation change for Maggie Murdaugh's phone, please.
From page 19?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We're just looking for the next orientation change.
I believe it's going to be that 9:06:12.
And what does that say?
Implements an orientation change to portrait.
But the previous change was to portrait, was it not?
It says vertical orientation.
So there's no intervening orientation change. It just goes to portrait and then changes to portrait again?
As I read the data, yes, that's correct. Like I said, I'm not a phone expert. I was given these different pieces to plot, and this is how they've been plotted.
When you're given these pieces to plot, do you ever notice if things don't seem to make sense or don't match with other data? Do you alert anyone?
So we have phone experts that review that. So they have reviewed the data, and I do not know if that's something that they came across.
And you can't tell me with that last, or can you tell me this? The last orientation change here on page 21, is that the last change on her phone until the extraction at the SLED lab?
I would have to go through and double check. Would you like me to do that?
You may.
Okay. You said orientation change, correct?
Yes, sir.
Per this condensed timeline, you are correct. That'd be the last orientation change that I see noted.
I mean, that's the last one until the phone was downloaded?
I believe so.
You show State's Exhibit.
That would, now the thing is, this is just the timeline, so it could be in what's already in evidence from Lieutenant Britt Dove, but in this timeline, that is the only one showing.
Okay.
And for orientation changes, we were really only concerned for the day of,
Right.
for this timeline.
Show what's been previously admitted as Defense Exhibit 38. And go to the last page. This was previously admitted in evidence during the examination of Lieutenant Dove. It's a complete list of every orientation change recorded on her phone as of the extract. Is the last one listed, the very last one, the 906 orientation change?
The 906.22 on the bottom?
Yes, sir.
That's correct. The 906, yep, at the far bottom column.
Yes. Can we show State's Exhibit 278? This was also admitted in that examination. This is a photo taken in the SLED lab before the extract, actually 5 days before the extract. This phone is in portrait mode, is it not?
The way I read it, yes, that is portrait mode.
So that very last orientation change we saw was to portrait mode because there are no subsequent orientation changes.
I assume so, yes.
And not landscape as it says on this.
The thing is, before this picture was taken, you have to remind yourself that, SLED got the phone, and then this photo was taken at a lab.
Yes.
So, I don't know. I don't know what happened. People, it's been moving around, manipulated. I don't.
But we just looked at a complete list of all the orientation changes, did we not? It wasn't time limited to a particular day. It's everything on the phone.
Like I said, I did not produce that document, so I'm going to have to go on your word on that.
Let me ask this before we kind of move on from this. Okay. It's been stated a few times in testimony, and I think you did as well, that you don't get an orientation change recorded when the screen is off. Is that correct?
That is my understanding from previous testimony.
Okay. So my screen is off. If I turn it, like to get an orientation change, and it's off, if I just stand here for a while, however long, an hour, and without moving the phone, turn the screen on, will there be an orientation change?
That is a technical question for an expert that we had up here yesterday. I am not an expert, and I am not a phone expert. So
where I'm going with that is simply, you don't know yourself in preparing this timeline whether the orientation changes that you're putting on here correspond with movement of the phone at that moment.
I do not. I'm going off of data I was given from phone experts that gave me the data and has been put on this timeline.
I'm going to turn now to the timeline and really focus on the timeline for Maggie Murdaugh. And I'm going to skip, kind of close to the time that we're...
Are you still on the condensed or the full?
I'm going to be on the condensed the entire
Okay.
time. I'm not going to refer to the other one. Okay. And I want to start on page 17 with that group text that Maggie Murdaugh read that came in at 8:31, but she read it at 8:49:26.
Okay.
And I guess the actual reading of that would be on page 19 for your reference. We'll start there.
On page 19, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
You have some screen off on times here, but you didn't put every time the screen went on and off, did you?
I do not recall. I'd have to look at what was given.
So you don't know if the screen of her screen went off at 8:49:28, came back on.
Everything should be on this document.
Okay. Did her screen go off at 8:49:28 and come back on at 8:53:08?
I have a screen on at 8:49:20.
And when did it go off?
I do not see it on here.
Well, let me ask it this way. Do you know that whether the screen went off at 8:49:28 and came back on at 8:53:08?
8:53. I do not unless I have it on here.
And then she has steps that begin at 8:53:15. Is that correct?
For this document, yes.
When you were looking at the step data, did you look at the corresponding distance data that goes to the step data?
I was just provided the timestamp and then the steps.
Are you aware that the phone in the same database keeps distance data with the step data?
I have been made aware of that.
But you have not looked at any of that distance data?
I was told that it's not accurate, it's not reliable, the distance, so I did not focus in on that.
So, would you think that it is possibly, well, just as an investigator, on your spreadsheet, I won't bother to put it up, but you had a bunch of time periods where Alec had steps, different times. Do you think there would be any relevance to whether the number of feet per step and all those different increments was extremely consistent?
Is there any relevance to it?
Would it maybe suggest the same person was walking?
Objections overruled.
I would have to, I didn't do the feet per step, so I'd have to see the data.
I understand that. And the
Yeah.
question is, would there be any relevance to an investigation to seeing that the feet per step were extremely consistent for disparate time periods of the same phone?
Like I said, this was just a tool that we used. It could be, it just was not explored.
And if this time period, 8:53 with Maggie Murdaugh's steps to 8:55:32, if the distance covered in that time were short, meaning she was moving particularly slowly, could that have any relevance?
It depends, but that distance is, we're told, is highly inaccurate, and everything is an estimate. So even the steps, that's we're told by the phone expert that's an estimate. That's not an exact number. The same, I would assume, for the distance.
So you don't think, you did not check to see if the speed at which Maggie Murdaugh was moving on that very last increment, the last time the phone says she was ever walking, there was no, how fast is she going, is she running, is she creeping? No one looked at that.
Objection, in fact, not in evidence.
Objections overruled.
I did not look at that, no. I cannot say for anyone else.
And the same question for Alex Murdaugh. Did anyone look for, I think you have, over 8 of these increments listed out, whether he was going particularly fast, unusually fast for him, unusually slow for him, the same speed he always goes. Did anyone look at that?
All we have here is the data that is on that sheet.
And you do have these steps per minute, but do you have any data suggesting that within, and I'll pick one just to make the question simpler, Alex Murdaugh's first, I'll pick an even easier one, entry number 30.
Okay.
Which is when he's at Alameda and then part of when he's leaving Alameda, is that correct?
That is correct, based by the time.
And it says 60 steps over almost just a little short of 10 minutes.
I believe so, yep.
So, of course, it's slightly more than 6 steps per minute, which would be a step every 10 seconds. So this time period is not saying that he's going that many steps per minute, right? It's saying he walked and then he didn't walk and he walked. Is that fair?
It's just giving us an analysis, a general overview of, our estimated steps that it gives us, and then estimated steps per minute. That's all it is. It's just a general.
Well, I'll just ask open-ended. Why is this last column steps per minute here? Why are you presenting this?
It's just another way to present the data.
So turning back to, I think we were on page 19.
Okay.
And Maggie Murdaugh's phone is walking. Now, we had from previous testimony an activation of the Siri user interface with the side button. Did you recall that from previous testimony?
I do not, but it could have been.
Okay, you don't recall previous testimony about that. Can we bring up Defense Exhibit 41? And there's a begin and end. It's all the same time there in the bottom couple rows. You can see 8:53:20.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this refreshes or if you recall, or if perhaps you know from experience that the Siri interface can be activated by squeezing and holding the right button on the phone. Do you know that?
I believe so if you have it, activated to do that.
So the phone's walking. It's in somebody's hand. Now, this is something that's not in your timeline, but again was certainly discussed with Lieutenant Dove. 8:54:32, the screen comes on, and a couple seconds later, there's a camera access. Do you recall that?
I do.
Okay, and that's not on your timeline?
It is not.
Okay. Now, that came up in testimony with both experts, and I believe, do you recall Lieutenant Dove said that it was possible to find out what caused that, but he had not himself looked to see.
That's correct.
And I believe investigator Grubb said he did not know why. Is that correct?
I believe so.
But it's knowable, according to the previous testimony?
That's correct.
But no one's checked to see?
To my knowledge, no.
And then after that, there's some orientation changes, and then finally the screen goes off, I believe, for an more extended period of time at 8:55:36.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, after this period, there's nothing else that happens with her phone other than missed calls and texts, except that final orientation change. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Now, does that fact that we aren't seeing anything after 8:55:36, does that mean that she was dead at 8:55:36?
Like I said, this is just data that I plotted.
So the answer is no?
I don't
It
know
does
that
not mean
answer.
that?
I have to go by the data here, and there's no activity.
Right.
You can take that however you want, but there's no activity.
I mean, is it fair, and this isn't trying to be tricky, if use of the phone ceases as time goes on, it's more and more likely there's something amiss, right? The first second no
assume
one's
so,
using
yeah.
the phone is normal. I mean, someone might easily go, even Paul might go 5 minutes without using his phone, but as you keep going on, it gets a little more likely something's wrong, right? Is that fair?
I would say so.
Okay.
But
So
you have it
it's
at
not, it's not an immediate thing that, well, the last,
Must witness be able to finish the answer he started?
I apologize, Your Honor, I honestly thought he had finished.
Oh, I'm good. Go ahead.
So it wouldn't be fair to say that if the last usage was at some particular second that the person was dead that second, right? It would create an inference that would increase in strength over time that no one's using the phone, something's wrong, right?
I can't answer that. I mean, I don't have the knowledge on that.
Do you recall in previous testimony that Special Agent Owen said with regard to Almeida and I think a blue raincoat, that it would take, in his estimation, 5 to 10 minutes to dispose of evidence already wrapped up? From this, do you recall that?
I do recall.
Okay. So to be consistent with the data you have here, well, let me ask this: how long with the test drives was to drive from the kennels to the main house?
I know we did various ones. I'd have to look at the data. We did at various speeds. It was very
Minute,
short.
15 seconds?
That would be a lot, I would say.
Okay. So, and we know that Alex's phone is at the house, right, from 8. It got left at the house. It's not going anywhere since it was up the house with the family.
I just show no activity on it.
Right.
You can assume it is at the house.
But it started showing activity again at 9:02 and 18 seconds. That's when the steps start.
That is correct. 283 steps.
So from that 8:55:36 to 9:02 with a minute and some seconds to get up to the house, you would have like 5 minutes if it were him to do everything and get back to the house in his house to the phone. 5 minutes.
I think you're missing that the phone was actually locked at 8:49 for Maggie's phone. So the 8:55:36 is just when the backlight is off, but her phone locks forever at 8:49.
But it's moving around, right, at 8:53. You didn't look at the speed at which it's moving, but that could tell us something. There's a Siri activation. I'm just asking my question, Your Honor.
What's the question?
Her phone is moving around starting at 8:53, comma, there's a Siri activation near the start of that time, comma, and then there's a camera activation during this time, and some orientation changes, and then it goes off. Is that all correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you don't know how fast the phone was moving during that period, but that is known, just no one has looked. Is that correct?
So everything is estimation with the phone. It does not track your exact, speed or distance or steps. It's all estimated. So an exact number is unknown.
And you have, I assume from your testimony, you don't know why someone would take Maggie's phone but not Paul's phone?
I would not know. I mean, I'm not there.
I mean,
I would not
given
know.
your job as a SLED agent, I mean, would the fact that the camera was, the phone was in someone's hand and it was an attempt to take a picture, would that be an inference you could draw?
He never said it attempted to take a picture, from what I heard, but you'd have to ask a technical expert on exactly what that camera function was for.
Well, you see, the thing is that the technical experts, they're not going to say either, are they? It's some investigator is going to have to make some inferences from the data, and the question is it a fair inference that if the camera's in somebody's hand and they're trying to take a picture, that might be why the killers take that phone and not the phone that's in somebody's pocket?
So the way
Your Honor.
What's the basis for the objection?
Argumentative.
The response by the defense. Any response?
Your Honor, I'm asking the investigator whether
What you're asking is the response to the objection. The objection is argumentative.
Your Honor, I do not believe it's argumentative. I'm asking if an inference would be fair.
I overrule the objection.
So the inference I'm looking at it is that the camera was trying to identify a face to unlock, which it did not. So that is the inference that I would look at that instead of taking a photo from a layperson perspective.
Right, except that's not an inference an investigator would make, correct? A technical expert would go and see what triggered the camera activation and tell that to an investigator, correct?
I was not, but I am not the technical person.
And I think we covered in some previous questioning that the testimony has been that that's knowable, but no one has checked. I kind of switch over to Paul,
Okay.
and just to sort of summarize everything up, there doesn't seem to be any missed activity until the unread text message from Rogan at 8:49:35. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And is it correct that his screen does not ever come on again until after the 911 call?
Is screen coming on?
Yes, sir.
I believe it dies shortly after at like 10:30, so I think 10:36.
And I'm aware of the screen
Okay.
coming on after the 911 call, but I'm asking, did it come on at any time between this text from Rogan and those after 10 o'clock times?
Let me just double check. I show a display screen on at 10:20:08.
Okay, so the answer is no?
It does turn on. That's what you asked, correct?
I'm sorry, I was asking if it turns on before the 911 call.
Before the 911 call. For the whole day?
Well, it would be about an hour and
An hour.
10 minutes, but
I'm not seeing a screen on before the 911 call. In that 9 to,
so
10 o'clock
incoming
time
text
frame.
messages or calls, if they were received, did not cause the screen to come on.
that is correct.
Is it possible, and I understand this may be a question for a technical person, but is it possible that that's because the battery was at 2%?
Like I said, I would not know that answer.
Did anyone ask, hey, why isn't the screen coming on these notifications?
Unfortunately, I think it's hard to tell, with the experts, but that would be my assumption that it would be either low battery.
That's fair.
Trying to conserve the battery because you don't want the light takes so much power, so I would assume that would be the answer.
So after, whatever happened after 8:49, his phone is not prompting him. It's not lighting up when things come in.
I don't know if it's vibrating or whatnot, but according to the data here, it is, it's not lighting up.
Now, I think the previous testimony was that whoever, if anyone saw his lock screen before the phone went dead, after the 911 call, would have seen the yo text. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
They would have also seen this 8:49 text, right?
The 8:49,
35.
35.
Or at least a notification that there were multiple texts, correct?
I would assume so, that's correct.
And there were at least 4 incoming calls from Rogan between 9:10 and 10:08. Is that correct?
I'm going to go off of your account.
9:10 and 28 seconds,
Okay.
9:42 and 17 seconds. I think there's one at 9:57,
Okay.
one at 10:08.
Correct.
The one at 10:08, that would be during the 911 call, correct?
That is correct.
And that would be during the 911 call, before Alex Murdaugh leaves the scene to go up to the house and come back.
Based on the data, that's correct.
We don't actually know why the screen came on those 2 times, do we? At 9:10 and 18, and then 10, 18, and then 10:20.
We do not.
You know how long the screen stayed on those times?
I do not have that.
You don't know if it was 12 seconds? Okay. At the second one of those, the 10:20:08 screen on, doesn't Alex Murdaugh's phone indicate he's walking at that time?
So we have a start time and an end time. Doesn't mean he's walking during the whole time, but that is what the
Well,
phone.
is this the
that's
start?
what,
I'm sorry, let me just ask, is this the start? Your Honor, it's just a clarification.
As soon as the witness starts talking, then you start talking? Who's talking? Were you talking? Yeah. Well, go ahead.
So the phone parses the data. It gives you a start time and an end time. Doesn't mean they're walking during that whole time. It just takes a start time and end time and gives you that data.
Sure.
So to say that someone's walking during the whole time would be, unreasonable.
After the 911 call, was Rogan the first person Alex Murdaugh called?
After the 911 call?
Yes, sir.
calls at 10:06:14. That you said Alex called?
Yes, the first person he called after hanging up with 911. Was it Rogan?
I have at 10:17:46, he calls Randy Murdaugh.
And that's his brother, correct?
That is correct.
Who was the second person he called?
He iMessages Randy and then calls Randy Murdaugh again. And then John Marvin.
John Marvin is another brother, correct?
Yep, at 10:19.
And then the third person he calls is Rogan, is that correct?
At that time, yes.
And is that about 2 minutes and 30 seconds after that first screen on time?
That's correct.
Okay. So not immediate, not the first person.
I think you're referring to that question that was previously during the 911 call. This is all after the 911 call.
Right. The question is, it's about 2.5 minutes after Paul's phone screen comes on that there's a call to Rogan, and it's the third person that Alex Murdaugh calls. Is that correct?
That was at 9:08. Wasn't the screen on?
No, 10:18 and 53 seconds.
That'd be correct.
So I think we went over that anyone who was looking at could see what was on Paul's screen, would see multiple missed messages, calls from Rogan right on the screen.
I would assume.
Even a call coming in during the 911 call.
I would assume, but
Okay. So as an investigator, do you think it would be terribly unreasonable that after calling other family members, someone would call the person who is the best friend of the dead son, who had multiple missed messages and calls, and even a call coming in during the 911 call? Is calling that person to ask what happened, what's going on, is that, to you as an investigator, an unreasonable thing to do after calling other family members?
I would, as an investigator, I think that would be very odd, given the scene and the whole situation, that you're on the phone constantly, yes.
That you're standing there next to your dead son, his phone is ringing from
Yep.
someone, and you call that person after calling other people.
Yes,
That would be
because I
unreasonable.
am standing over my son and wife, and it's just witnessing that for the first time. I would think that would be, to have someone on their phone constantly like that, right after, given the scene and the situation, yes, as an investigator, I would think that is very,
It wouldn't be someone trying to find out what happened.
at that moment, that would be the last thing that would probably come through my mind as an investigator, looking at the scene, is trying to figure out what happened minutes after I discover it. I'd be in a state of shock if that was me personally.
And speaking of a state of shock, I think you have in the timeline later on, he reads some spam text message about, I think there's a picture of a woman in a bikini.
I wouldn't call it a spam text message. It's from Michael Gunn, who would be one of his friends.
A group text.
A group text, yeah.
And then he Googles the name of a restaurant in Edisto Beach, is that correct?
That is what comes up on his phone extraction.
And doesn't he also call a videographer he hadn't spoken to in years?
Can you give me a page number to refer to?
Yes. Page 42, Brian White, last entry.
That's what the data shows.
So he would seem to be in a state of shock. None of that makes any sense, does it? You're not going to Google the
I'm
name
not.
of a restaurant after you find your son murdered.
I'm not Alex Murdaugh. I don't know what he was thinking at that moment. I probably wouldn't be on my phone.
Really, you wouldn't be calling family?
I might be calling family, but I wouldn't be
The testimony
Googling
was
and
that
doing
Rogan
stuff.
was family.
If you ask a question, if you want him to answer, you have to give him an opportunity to answer. Proceed.
I would not be Googling and doing other things with my phone, no.
You think he was, do you believe he was Googling a restaurant, or do you think he was fat fingering the phone because he was in shock?
I have to go off of the data, and that's what the data shows.
And you believe that calling family and calling someone that the prior testimony was like another son is unreasonable in the circumstances?
I would say so, yes. Given the fact that you just arrived to the scene, yes.
And had just arrived to the scene, had actually been there at that point 15, 20, 25 minutes, correct?
That's correct. I'd be doing anything I could to help my loved ones.
This, now, kind of turning back to Maggie's phone, her screen was on at 9:06 and 12 seconds, right? That last orientation change.
Let me flip back to it. You said her screen was on? Is
Yes.
that what you said? Yeah, her phone was locked, but her screen, yeah, for the orientation from previous testimony, the screen had to be on for it to log the orientation changes.
So there was some movement of the phone between 9:06 and 12 seconds and 9:06 and 20 seconds.
That'd be my understanding given previous testimony, correct?
And in this period, 9:02 to 9:06 and 47 seconds, Alex Murdaugh is walking, I think, 283 steps in that time period.
In that timestamp period, correct?
Yeah. But her phone is not. No one's walking with her phone, correct?
The phone is not logging any kind of steps. I don't know if someone's walking with it, but it's not logging steps at that time.
But at that time, Alex Murdaugh's phone is logging steps.
His phone's logging from 9:02:18 to 9:06:47. I believe her last log was in the 8 o'clock, the 8:53 to 8:55.
And at 9:06 and 14 or 15 seconds, Alex Murdaugh calls her phone, correct?
That is correct.
So he calls her phone while walking. We're in a period in which his steps are being recorded by the phone, to be specific.
There's a begin time and an end time. He could have stopped walking a couple seconds, couple minutes into it. It doesn't give us that precise data from these phone distractions.
And that time period that he stops walking is 9:06 and 47 seconds, correct? And the car, the Chevy Suburban, starts a second later after that, right?
From the data, correct.
So it's a fair inference that he ends that by walking to the car, getting in and turning it on.
I'm not sure when exactly he got in the car or how long he was sitting in the car before, but this is what the timestamps show, and this is what the vehicle start time shows, and the end time for the steps.
So his phone is stepping, walking, while he calls Maggie's phone, which is moving, but not stepping with him. Is that what the data shows?
That's your inference on the data, but
Well, I mean, breaking it down, his phone is in a period of steps, correct?
unknown when there is steps
Just
during that period.
his phone is in this time period of steps, correct?
Correct.
Her phone is not in any period of steps, correct?
Correct.
Her phone in this time period where the phone call's coming in, 9:06, 12 seconds, 20 seconds, there's some motion because there's an orientation change, correct?
That's correct.
And he's calling the phone during this period that his phone's in steps, right, at that moment, right?
I cannot say that he's actually in steps at 9:06:12.
Yes, and you said it, but his phone says there's this period that he's walking, and in that period, between the start and end times, he's calling her phone.
That is correct, but you can see during the 911 call too that there's times where someone could be stopped, someone could be walking, so we don't know if he stopped at 9:05:15 and did the orientation changes and he's right at the car. I don't know that.
Do we know, we'll put this, do we have any evidence that her phone and his phone ever moved together? Not speculation, but evidence showing that they're moving together. Same person moving at the same time with both phones.
Moving together, like physically moving, or functioning in like...
Yes, that they're both moving, the same person is carrying both phones, they're moving at the same time.
I would argue that between 9:06:12 and 9:20 that the same person has both phones.
Because there's an orientation change and no steps on this phone.
You have an
Steps on this phone?
you have an orientation change starting while someone's calling, looking at the phone during that time period.
And would it perhaps be reasonable that someone has that phone and an incoming call comes in, the screen says Alex Murdaugh, and it gets tossed out a window? Is that another fair possible explanation?
That could be your explanation.
Why would that explanation be less fair than what you just said, based on the data?
So how you interpret the data.
On the drive to Alameda and back, did Alec take any detours from the expected route?
Not that I could see. The route matched up with his interviews.
And in your timeline, we occasionally see these, I guess, infotainment systems coming on, but nothing else happening. The prior testimony was that even the FBI engineer doesn't know why that is. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. He said it could be, you get close to the vehicle. Sometimes when I don't know if you newer GM vehicles, you get close to it and you can kind of hear a little buzzing noise. It's almost like the system's booting up. That's how he described it to me. It could be the key fob being closed. It could be the car unlocking, locking, door opening. Just they don't know what actually caused it, but it's just booting up and running in the background.
When you were looking at the sort of going in and out of park data, did you look at the data for other days than June 7th?
I did not.
So you wouldn't know whether on other days there are periods in which it seems to go in and out of park repeatedly in a short period of time?
I would not.
You wouldn't know if that happened on 6/4, 6/5, or also 6/6?
I would not, no. I was focusing on June 7th, 2021.
Would looking at those other days and seeing the same thing happen inform your interpretation of seeing it going in and out of park on 6/7?
I was just looking on the day of the murders.
I mean, if it did that every single day, would it seem unusual to also do it on 6/7?
That'd be a question for Mr. Fakowski, who actually looks at that data as a profession. It would.
Is he's going to make inferences about behavior based on the data, or is he just going to say what the data is?
He could say what the data is, but I wouldn't know an inference. I don't know someone's driving pattern and how they shift, and how would I know that?
And he would?
But how would I know that?
Well, the question really is, if it happens every day, is there anything unusual about it happening on 6/7?
A period of days is not every day. You'd have to look at I would assume, a wide range of days to get.
How many?
I don't know.
If it happened every day for the preceding 3 days, would that be enough?
Every day is a new day. I would not, something could happen different on a different day. I mean, I don't know how you could compare that data. You go different places, you do different things happen during drives. I don't think you could accurately show that.
You were You showed sort of towards the end some text messages, and one of them seemed to make a reference regarding possible drug use. Do you remember that?
I do.
And that was dated May 6th?
Do you have it? Do you have the copy pulled out? Are you referring to the text from Paul
Yes, I am.
to Alex? Okay. I have May 6, 2021 at 10:52.
And then there was some Google searches by Maggie Murdaugh.
That is correct.
Are you aware of a text from Alec regarding pills to Maggie on May 7?
I would have to see the text.
Show you what's been marked as defense 138, which I believe.
Yep. I am very sorry that I do this all to you. I love you. Yep.
Objection.
No objection to the exhibit, Your Honor.
Now I offer what's been marked as defendants 138 instead of
Let's admit it.
Elma. So this was Mr. Murdaugh's response to being confronted about the pills that you previously read.
I can only assume this is from Alex to Maggie. The text message I read was from Paul to Alex.
So his family was aware of his drug issues, correct? I mean, from the texts.
I would assume from the text.
And he was aware that they were aware, correct?
Correct.
And they appear to be loving and supporting.
Well, this is Alex to Maggie. If you read other text messages, she never responds to this that day, from what I saw. So I don't know, unless you have what she sent back, or if you can't ask them, I don't know if they were loving and supporting of it. This is from Alex to Maggie.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to see further text messages. I beg the court's indulgence. No further questions, Your Honor.
You direct.
May it please the court.
I was guilty.
All right, we have the computer up.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, have you go to the jury room for a short break. Be in recess for 5 minutes.
All rise. May now be seated.
You may bring the jury. Thank you. You may proceed.
Special Agent Rudolski, a couple matters I have up on the screen. This is from your cast slides from the defendant's trip coming back from Alameda. Is that right?
That is correct.
And going to this next slide, and this is the trip, what was the max speed the defendant hit on this trip back from Alameda back to Moselle, approximately?
I believe it was around 70. I'm sorry, so the trip back to Moselle, that would have been around 80.
80?
Yep, the previous
And
one was around 70.
Did the data, while he was still at Alameda, did it reflect that the vehicle paused for a period of time in the driveway before continuing?
It did.
And would that pause affect that average speed that you calculated
It would.
in that time?
It would.
I want to go to page 22 of your condensed timeline.
Okay.
And up at the top, tell the jury what time period the data reflects that Maggie Murdaugh's backlight was off.
It shows from 9:07 p.m. to 9:31:44 p.m.
And during the entirety of that time period, does the data reflect that her phone was also locked?
It does.
If you could turn to page 18. Page 19, my apologies.
Okay.
From 8:53 to 8:55, what does the data reflect? Any steps logged on Maggie's phone?
The data reflects Maggie Murdaugh's iPhone shows 59 steps logged.
Can the data tell who was holding that phone during that time period?
It does not, no.
If you could turn to page 39, please. At 10:20:08, what happens, if anything, on Paul's phone?
Paul's iPhone, it shows display on, screen auto lock.
Screen auto lock?
That is correct.
What is your understanding again of auto lock?
My understanding of auto lock, so the phone is already locked, but it's just an automatic feature that when the screen turns on, it just auto locks. It just logs it as auto locks even though it's already locked.
Could that be from not recognizing a face?
Either a face or, pushing the button on the side, but yeah.
What's the next entry on your timeline after that screen on auto lock on Paul's phone at 10:20:08?
After-
Very next entry at 10:21:25.
Alex calls Rogan. So at 10:20:08, we have that screen on, an auto lock, and at 10:21:25, Alex calls Rogan Gibson.
In preparing this timeline here today for the jury and for this investigation, what was your specific job with that timeline?
The specific job was just to take all the data that we collected throughout this whole investigation and put it in one concise document.
Synthesize it together in one timeline
That is correct.
from multiple sources,
From multiple sources.
provided to you by experts.
That is correct.
Thank you, Special Agent Rudolph.
Anything further?
I think there was some, a question was asked about peak speeds to and from Moselle. Did you look to see if he passed anyone on the way there or back?
What do you mean past anyone? Like a vehicle?
Yes, that his car passed another vehicle on a two-lane road.
I don't know how I'd be able to tell that with this data.
So you don't know if a very fast peak speed was simply gunning it to pass another car?
I do not. But at that late night hour, I would think that'd be, with, the area, not a lot of people out.
I mean, that's just total speculation. You don't know if there's another car out
Just
there or
like
not.
yours is total speculation that he
Right.
passed someone.
You don't
That'd be
know.
correct. Yep, I do not know.
Yeah. You don't know if there were any other cars out there to pass. You don't know if he was passing another car. You just don't know, do you?
I do not, just like with your first question.
And you also don't know why Paul's phone, the screen came on those two times at 10:18 and 10:20, do you?
I do not physically know.
That second time that the phone came on was at that moment, Alec was actually on the phone with John Marvin, correct?
At what time?
The second time that the phone came on, 10:20, and I believe it was 8 seconds.
So at 10:20 and 8 seconds, that's when we have the display on. And at 10:21:25, Alex calls Rogan
And
Gibson.
at 10, when the display comes on, at that very second, Alex Murdaugh was on the phone, his phone, with John Marvin, correct?
If you do the math, I believe so, correct.
And this was also during a period in which, according to his phone, he's walking around, though again, we don't know if he was walking that exact second. But it's during a period of steps,
It's during a
correct?
period, correct.
Walking around on the phone with John Marvin. No further questions, Your Honor.
You may step down. From the state.
Your Honor, as discussed, we request a very brief recess for housekeeping matters.
All right, the housekeeping matters are noted. Any further witnesses by the state?
Not at this time, Your Honor.
State rests but for the housekeeping matters.
The housekeeping matters, and then, yes, at that point, the state would formally rest. Yes, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll have you go to the jury room for another break. Please do not discuss the case. Seated. So what type of housekeeping matters do you have?
I just wanted to do, as my practice is just one final exhibit check, make sure that there was nothing missed. It will just take a moment, Your Honor.
All right.
motion that we will make. I mean, perhaps we could do it while the jury's out, but then he can formally.
That's why I did it in the manner in which I did it. We'll do it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That, as Your Honor knows, after the evidence is closed, if there's a failure of competent evidence tending to prove the charge in the indictment, then the defendant is entitled to a directed verdict. The court should consider only the existence or non-existence of the evidence and not its weight. In this case, Your Honor, the evidence is exclusively circumstantial, and in State v. Dent, the South Carolina Court of Appeals in 2021 explained that the standard to be applied when the state relies upon circumstantial evidence is that all of the circumstances must be consistent with each other and when taken together point conclusively to the guilt of the accused beyond a reasonable doubt. If their circumstances merely portray the defendant's behavior as suspicious, the proof has failed. And also another legal doctrine that we would point out is mere presence at the scene of a crime without more is insufficient to constitute guilt. The reason I say that legal doctrine, Your Honor, is at most what the state has proven and offered of proof is that the defendant was at the kennels at 8:44. He misstated that he was there, or he lied about he was being down there, and that raises a level of suspicion, and that they have concocted a cell phone timeline to come up with a time of death without any actual evidence of time of death. And there is no direct and frankly circumstantial evidence presented that the defendant shot and killed his wife Maggie or son Paul. As the evidence established, the murderer would have had blood and biological material on him or her. The murderer would have had blood on his or her clothing. The murderer would have murder weapons. The murderer or murderers would have evidence of disposing of murder weapons on property or vehicle. And there's no evidence that Alex Murdaugh had any of this. He had no blood from the brutal murder of his son Paul. He had no DNA from Paul on his clothing in an area where you would expect to find it if he had shot his son, which he did not. There's no GSR on his clothing or clothes that is inconsistent with Alec holding a shotgun for protection. The state has proven at most that he was at the kennels at 8:44 p.m. The state does not have proof of time of death. The state does only have proof of when the last time Paul and Maggie used their phones. Most importantly, and as I mentioned earlier, the law is clear. Mere presence at the scene of a crime is insufficient to establish guilt. Although, to be equally clear, Alex Murdaugh was not at the scene of the crime at the time his wife and son were murdered, and there's no evidence that he was. And for that reason, we move for a directed verdict.
Yes, sir. By the state.
Your Honor, looking at the evidence that's been presented by the state, first of all, without detailing every bit of evidence, there's been ample evidence of motive evidence presented in this particular case. The years of embezzlement and theft and the exposure, very significant exposure that the defendant was facing as June the 7th approached, would include the loss of a job, the loss of a career, the loss of his bar license, the loss of years of wealth, the potential to lose everything, in his own words. You've heard evidence about a confrontation June 7th on those matters that very day, as well as the boat hearing that was upcoming. And the effects that would have. Also heard extensive evidence of the defendant's financial condition on that day as it moved forward. Also evidence, Your Honor, of his ongoing narcotics addiction and how those particular things were relevant to what was going on as it related to the victims. There's been evidence, and again, as Your Honor is aware, the evidence must be taken in the light most favorable to the state, that family weapons were used to murder Maggie and Paul. You've heard evidence from the defendant's own mouth about a missing shotgun, and of course we have extensive evidence about the missing blackout, that being the replacement gun. Of course, you've heard evidence that the defendant claimed that was missing at Christmas time, but there was evidence from Will Loving that that gun was present and being used, including at the side of the house as late as turkey season, just a couple months prior to the murders. And that from the firearms expert, that the cases found around Maggie's body were cycled through the same weapon. The murder weapon cycled the same cases as weather cases that were found at the side of the house, consistent with what Will Loving testified, as well as at the shooting range across the street. You've additionally heard that the same exact brand and weight of ammo that was used to kill Maggie was found throughout the property, as well as the same buckshot and birdshot ammo as well. There's been evidence presented by the state as to the defendant's trip to Alameda and his interaction with Shelley Smith after the murders, as well as the bringing the raincoat in. Additionally, that he left and moved his dad's truck in the four-wheeler, and that the raincoat contained high levels of GSR. There's been evidence presented in this particular case inconsistent with the defendant's statements to law enforcement, multiple changes of clothes that particular day, as well as evidence from Blanca that the clothes that he was wearing in the Snapchat video were never seen again, as well as the fact that the earlier clothes that he was wearing were not seen either. You have evidence that the defendant claimed that he was unaware that Maggie was coming to Moselle, or he did not ask for that, but you've heard evidence from multiple sources, including a text message that he specifically asked the victim to be present on that day. Your Honor, he was found in possession of a shotgun that cannot be excluded as a murder weapon that also had Maggie's blood on it. And then, of course, Your Honor, we have extensive phone and other digital evidence, and I don't need to reiterate the last witness, but that's been presented from multiple witnesses and multiple sources of a timeline. The defendant, of course, claimed that he was never at the scene, and the evidence shows, pursuant to the state's theory and reasonable inferences therefrom, that he was at the scene, contrary to what he told everyone who would listen. Just minutes, he's at the scene with the two victims just minutes before, under the state's theory and a reasonable inference from the evidence, the victims were killed. Additionally, his conduct in the timeline after that, there's a number of reasonable inferences about that that are consistent with the defendant's guilt. And to summarize a month's worth of evidence, that is the summary. I'm happy to address the timeline more, but I know that Your Honor just heard it in great detail.
There's a motion for directed verdict that's made at the end of the state's case. The court is concerned with whether there is any evidence, either direct or circumstantial, which reasonably tends to prove the guilt of the accused, or from which the guilt of the accused may be fairly and logically deduced. In this case, we have had, is it day 20 now? I guess 18 days of direct and circumstantial evidence. And the law makes no distinction between the weight or value to be given either direct evidence or circumstantial evidence. Nor is a greater degree of certainty required of circumstantial evidence than of direct evidence. Cases can be proven by direct evidence, circumstantial evidence, or a combination of the two. At this stage of the proceedings, there is evidence to support a guilty verdict if it is believed by the jury. I therefore deny the motion for a directed verdict. Ready to roll with the defense?
Rock and roll, Your Honor.
Rock and roll. All right, well, let's take a 30-second stretch and bring the jury out and press on. And let's see, you can bring the jury. You may bring the jury. There you go. Be seated, please. Very good. Madam Forelady, how's the jury doing? Doing good. Very good. You have heard the state's case. It is now the defense's turn. And you may call your first witness.
All right. Coroner Richard Harvey, please. Yeah, go look. I'm sorry. You know what she looks like? Okay, good.
Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth so help you God?
I do.
You would, sir, be seated. State your full name for the record. Spell the last part.
Okay.
And before we begin testimony, I think, Mr. Waters, you're going to formally rest.
May it please the court, Your Honor. In the matter of the indictments of the defendant Alex Murdaugh for the murders of his wife Maggie and his son Paul, the state of South Carolina rests.
The state is rested, and now it's the defense's turn.
full name for the record, please.
My name is Richard Harvey.
And Mr. Harvey, you are an elected official here in Colleton County?
Yes, sir. I am the coroner of Colleton County.
Okay, and briefly describe your duties to the jury so they understand what a coroner does.
We basically investigate any death that occurs outside a hospital, any death that dies within 24 hours of admission to a hospital, any emergency room death is reported to the coroner's office as well. And primarily our responsibility is to do an investigation as to the cause of their death, including medical records, autopsies, and that's basically my responsibility, is to determine what the cause of death and the manner of death is.
So, you don't have a medical degree, though?
No, sir.
Okay.
But I was one of the first medically trained coroners in the state of South Carolina.
Okay. And how long have you been coroner?
This is my 30th year.
30th year. So let me talk a little bit about in general. Well, no, let me just go ahead and cut to the chase here. You have a file with you, and I believe it's a file concerning the deaths of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh.
I do.
And how did you get notified of their deaths?
I was actually notified by one of my deputies who was on call that evening. And any time there's a homicide along that lines, in most cases, I attend those. And he was on call, and basically he told me he also has another job because he's only part-time. And he told me, he says, look, I can't stay. He says, I've got to work tomorrow morning. And he says, I hate to dump this on you, but he says, but, this is going to be yours.
So you took, well, first let me back up for just a second. Did you respond, and if so, what time did you get to the scene? And I'm going to lead you and say in Moselle.
I was notified at 23:04, which is 11:04 in the evening.
Okay.
And I arrived on the scene. Let me back up there. I arrived on the scene at 23:04. I was actually notified about 22:30 by my deputy who was on call.
So 22:30 would be 10:30?
Yes, sir.
So you got notified at 10:30. You got on the scene at
11:04.
And were you by yourself?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Did you process this scene? Did you have somebody take? Did you take photographs or something?
Yes, sir, I did.
So the photographs in your file are your photographs.
Yes, sir.
And in taking those photographs, did you, for instance, go into the feed room and take some photographs?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And had that crime scene been processed by SWED at that point?
No, sir.
Okay. Did you do anything to, and I'll be frank with you, there's some footprints that have been identified as law enforcement or perhaps your folks that were in the feed room, perhaps in blood, before SWED had finished processing. Are those your folks or SWED or who, do you know?
I'm unaware of those.
Okay. So when you took those photographs, did you take precautions to, how do you not disturb evidence?
We've always kind of followed a pattern of we follow the same path in and the same path out. Therefore, we don't cross over into any possible assailants.
Okay. And again, you're preserving evidence. It's a homicide, so this is your
Correct.
case, right? And you do that pursuant to state law.
Yes, sir.
And we've received your photographs. Thank you for those. And I think you gave them to SWED also, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so you perform a function also. I've looked at the death certificates of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh, and you have a time of death of 9 o'clock. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's go through when you begin to examine the body to determine a time of death. Tell me how you do that. Well,
initially that evening, when I initially got there, I was told that SLED was coming, which I knew, depending on where SLED was coming from, it depends. It could be an hour, it could be 2 hours. It all depends on what part of the state and what group is actually coming to you. My initial processing was that I went and checked both bodies, and I simply put my hands in their armpits to determine how warm they are. This is one of the things we do sometimes to try and estimate a time of death. Is the body cold? Is the body warm? And one of the other things we check for is what they call rigor. And rigor is basically when a person dies, the body goes through this process, and as it goes through this process, your joints start to stiffen up. And when I initially got there, that was all I did initially because I knew SLED was coming.
So was rigor or rigor? I'm not sure how you pronounce it.
I call it rigor.
I call it rigor, but so if you'll allow me to say rigor, because
That's fine.
I've never said rigor. Was there rigor or rigor?
There was not.
Okay, so these folks had been dead less than a couple hours?
1 to 3 hours typically is what they say that rigor should start developing.
Okay, and in terms of trying to estimate or get it a little bit closer than 1 to 3 hours, you took your hand. Show me what you did, and you did it both for Paul and Maggie?
Yes.
How about, would you, let me see how we can get this, see it. Could you step down here, please?
Sure.
And they were laying on the ground, both of them, right?
Yes, sir.
And did you move them?
No.
Okay, so...
They were covered with a sheet initially when I got there.
Right, so let's have you stand over
Okay.
here so the jury can see me. And you went up to Paul, and where did you put your hand?
I have to think now which way Paul was laying.
I'm not worried about
Right,
those left or
okay.
right.
Basically what I did is I lifted his arm up just a little bit here, and I stick my hand up into the armpit. And that's one of the central areas of your body without using the only other choice is a rectal thermometer. And in most cases when you have that many people around, I'm not going to pull somebody's pants down to utilize a rectal thermometer. So I stick my hands in their armpit, and like I say, I can get an idea, how warm they are.
Okay, and you did the same thing to Maggie?
I did the same thing
Go
to
ahead,
Maggie.
And you concluded on your death certificate 9 o'clock.
That's strictly an estimation.
That's a guess.
It's a guess.
Okay, could have been 8:30,
Could have been 8:30.
could have been 10 o'clock.
There are no witnesses there to tell me exactly what time this happened.
Do you carry a rectal thermometer to do specific measurements?
Well, usually what I'll do is I'll get it from fire rescue, the ambulance,
Uh-huh,
and I'll borrow theirs. And yes, I do rectal temps.
but you didn't do it on that.
But we didn't do it that night, no.
And that's the reason the death certificate says 9 o'clock.
Right. That was an estimation from what I found as far as the warmth of the body.
Okay. Thank you, court's indulgence. That we understand each other. Your statement of 9 o'clock, it could have been 8 o'clock.
It could have been 8 o'clock.
Their death could have been the result of being shot at 8 o'clock.
I basically looked at 2.5 hours from the time that the call came in to the time I actually got there.
So they could have been shot at 10 o'clock
Could have been.
or any time in between.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Coroner. Please answer any questions.
By the state.
Mr. Harvey, you did not use rectal or any sort of thermometer on that night?
No, sir.
And Isn't it true that the best way to determine the actual time of death, particularly in a violent homicide, is to take the temperature?
Yes, sir.
Correct.
Yes, sir.
And the temperature decreases roughly at a rate of 1.5 degrees every hour,
Right.
correct?
Correct.
And it's also affected by the ambient temperature in the area.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Yet, as I understand your testimony, correct me if I'm wrong, you really do not have a general idea as to when that incident actually occurred.
That's right. Yes, sir. That's true.
Because you didn't take the temperature, correct?
Right. And thermometers are not always accurate either. So, and that's one thing that we've learned over the years. I mean, we do have, and actually we now have the, I can't think of ultraviolet light, the light that shoots for the forehead. But what I've determined with that is that it's not necessarily accurate, is that I may shoot it at the forehead and it'll say 99 degrees, but if I shoot it in your ear, it might say 103.
That's right.
So, I mean, they're not necessarily accurate either.
That's correct. And it's also impacted by body weight, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Age, elderly
Yes, sir.
versus youth, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the weather,
Yes, sir.
correct?
Yes, sir.
If they were covered by a
Yes, sir.
sheet, that
Which
would,
they were at that time when I initially got
that could maintain something?
Yes, sir.
If they got wet through rain, that could affect it?
that could, yep, that could
And
definitely.
you had
drop.
rain at that time, didn't you?
It had not rained hard at that point. Both
Not
of their
hard.
both of their hairs were heads of hair were dry.
Okay. And all those are factors which reflect what the actual time of death is.
Yes, sir.
Yet temperature is key.
Yes, sir.
And the only information you have is that the bodies were warm, correct?
Yes, sir.
Based upon
And
your,
Riger had not started.
and that usually begins to occur within 1 to 3 hours.
1 to 3
correct?
hours. So that's the time frame that I was looking at.
Okay. And you walked around the area, got close to them at that particular time.
Yes,
Is
sir.
that correct? And you were walking in the scene, correct?
Yes, sir.
No further questions.
Yes, sir.
Two questions.
Sure.
Do you remember when SLED showed up?
I do have probably the times for that. I did not see SLED on here, though.
Let me perhaps ask another question.
Okay.
Was Carleton County already there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Were there Carleton County detectives there?
Yes, sir. They're,
Okay. Did any of them talk to you about time of death?
no,
Did any of them ask you what your examination revealed?
no,
Did any of them ask you how you came to your decision of the time of death?
no, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anything further? Nothing further. Thank you, sir. You may step down. Yes, sir.
Shailene Tyndall to the stand, please.
Come forward. Yes, sir.
Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
If you would, please be seated. State your full name for the record. Spell your last name. Try speaking that mic so they can hear you.
Yes, ma'am. I'm Shalane Tyndall, SHALANETINDAL.
Ms. Tyndall, we've talked on the phone a couple times,
Yes, sir.
but we've never met, have we?
No, sir.
Okay. And I appreciate you being willing to come here on such short notice today. I know you've got other things to do. So, where do you work?
I work for the Colleton Sheriff's Office as public information part-time, and then for my full-time position, I work for the nonprofit blood organization, the Blood Connection, as the divisional logistics coordinator and calendar specialist.
Okay. Let me find my glasses, I'm sorry. So, back on June 7th and 8th of 2021, what was your job? What was your job back then with the
I was solely the public information officer at the Sheriff's Office at that time.
Colleton County Sheriff's Office?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I want to show you a document and see if you can identify this. I think the easiest way to do that is, hold on one second, I'm sorry. Apologize, Your Honor, I've just gotten my two documents jumbled. Here we go. Have you seen this document before?
I'm aware of the Post and Courier publishing things of this nature, yes, but not strictly this document in
Okay,
question.
if you go to the second page. Now, does this, if you look halfway down the page, does that, there is a quoting here from you, correct?
Yes, sir.
Is it accurate?
This quote was actually coordinated between SLED and us at the time. We received multiple inquiries from the media, and per the sheriff's standard protocol, anytime SLED is in charge of a case or investigation, it's standard procedure to reach out to them and coordinate something with them.
Okay, so the quote from you, this is on the morning, this is the Post and Courier on the morning of June 8th, and the quote contained by you in here, we'll get how that was put together, but is it accurate?
The quote wasn't by me, it was a joint information from SLED and the Sheriff's Office.
Sheriff spokeswoman Shalane Lowe's referred questions. So, but you were part of the release of this statement?
Yes, it was a joint. Mhm.
Okay. Your Honor, I'd like to offer this into evidence.
No, could I look at it, please? Your Honor, I have no objection. We have no objection to the quote, but the article, I hadn't read the article, we just object to the rest of the article, and I think he's agreed with that.
I just want these two paragraphs.
No objection.
No objection to what?
To her quote that she gave and not the rest of the article. We're in agreement on that, if Your Honor is.
Is that what you're offering?
Yes, sir. I'm going to have her publish 2 paragraphs in this story. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And for the record, Your Honor, this is a story in the Post and Courier on the morning of June 8th, which would be the morning after the murders. So what I'd ask you to do is, it's in quotes, would you read this paragraph and this paragraph, publish it to the jury? This paragraph at this time, and then the paragraph right after that, okay? Take it. And would you slow down just a little bit for me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
At this time, there is no danger to the public. The Sheriff's Office said, if information is received that dictates otherwise, we will immediately notify the public. Sheriff spokeswoman Shalane Lowe's referred questions regarding the incident to SLED and the Colleton County Coroner's Office. A request for 911 audio recordings was denied due to the ongoing investigation.
That's okay. All right, now, so that statement was the public has nothing to worry about, right?
That's what it states, yes, sir.
Okay, now, and let me ask you the process for this something like this getting released. You said SLED was involved?
Can you clarify exactly what you're asking?
Okay, so this statement, at this time there's no danger to the public, the sheriff's office said, you would be the spokesperson for the sheriff's office.
Correct, but this was a joint statement released in coordination with SLED's PIO and us while we were waiting on an updated information to do an actual letterhead release.
Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is on that, did you release, were you the one making this release, or was SLED making, I mean, when I say, I'm talking about physically, how did the Post and Courier get this quote?
SLED and I, PIO at the time, coordinated multiple times through numerous phone calls. There was also emails. This was discussed over the phone due to them being the acting agency on the case, but it did come from my email, but it was coordinated with SLED's PIO at the time.
Okay, so SLED signed off on this statement.
From what I understand from speaking with their PIO at the time.
I mean, you consulted with their, now PIO stands for?
Public Information Officer.
Okay, so the Sheriff's Department has a Public Information Officer, you.
Yes, sir.
SLED has a Public Information Officer named?
At the time, I believe it was Tommy Crosby.
Tommy Crosby. Y'all talked and emailed?
On numerous occasions from the time of the incident on further.
And decided this was the statement that should be made?
When I coordinated with SLED's PIO, this is what was mentioned and this is what we had published.
Okay, and what you're saying is there's no danger to the public. If information is received that dictates otherwise, we'll immediately notify the public. Was there a subsequent release given?
After this statement that we put out?
Right.
Yes, there was a joint letterhead release. The initial, what the Post and Courier published was an actual statement. Later on, we actually published a release while we were waiting on additional information. And
that subsequent statement didn't indicate there was any danger to the public. It didn't change this position, did it?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Did SLED and the Sheriff's Department change its position and put out a statement saying, whoa, now, there's something to worry about? Or did they just not mention this again?
When we did the updated release, that same information was also in the body that was sent over to SLED for their approval. Tommy Crosby had taken a moment to look at the release and later, I guess, decided that we took that out of the release and that it was what was published, excuse me.
So, but they never came back and said, there's something to worry about. They just took this language out.
Yes.
Okay. And SLED signed off on that?
We worked on this together, yes.
Okay, but it wouldn't have gone out if SLED hadn't said?
Yes, sir.
Let it out, correct? I mean, you get information and then you shape it into a release here or subsequently that is digestible. Maybe that's the best way to put it. You're the wordsmith. You're the one that tries to make it make sense.
Yes, sir. Public information, we're not privy to investigations. We just receive details, and then we take those and turn them into paragraphs so the paper and anywhere in the media can print for layman's terms to be better understood by the public.
And I want to make sure I understand this. Any subsequent release never changed. Actually, I think you said the subsequent release said the same thing. At this time, there's no danger to the public. That didn't change, correct?
In the updated release that was sent out on letterhead, yes, that was removed.
That was removed?
Yes, sir.
But did they say there is a danger to the public? They never said that, did they?
No, sir.
Beg the court's indulgence for just a moment. One other question. In this story, your last name is Lowe's?
Yes, sir. I got married since then. I guess somebody decided to like me. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Please answer any questions.
And I missed the last question. Did you get married?
Yeah, you sure trying to court me? No, I'm just kidding.
I'm happily married. I am not.
No, I'm just picking.
I just couldn't hear. What was the date of the second release that Mr. Harpoon? I honestly don't know.
Am I talking into here?
Yes, ma'am.
The date of the second is the
Can't hear
same
Mr. Meadows.
date.
I apologize, Your Honor.
The date of the second.
The initial letterhead release was released on the same date a few hours after the initial statement.
So the one he was asking about second was the same exact statement, word for word, that was released earlier.
No, the second, what we initially put out at around, I think, before 10 o'clock in the morning, we had received inquiries from Fitz News, News 4, and I believe the Post and Courier. So the initial statement that I coordinated with SLED was what he was referring to. Afterwards, an updated letterhead release, as additional information became available to us, was coordinated with SLED that redacted that information.
Okay. And I'm just going to show you, for this, is this the document you're talking about here? And it's dated June 21st. Is that what you're talking about or not?
No, that is not.
Congratulations on your marriage. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you.
Anything further?
Only this question. Did you think that Mr. Meadows was proposing to you a moment ago?
I don't know. I'm just picking.
No further questions. Thank you.
You may step down.
Thank you, sir.
Any additional witnesses today?
Your Honor, as we've discussed, the next witness would be extraordinarily lengthy. It's 4:30. I apologize to the jury and the court for not having somebody intermediate, but we just couldn't find anybody, not knowing when the state was going to rest.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we will adjourn for the weekend. As you know, Monday is a holiday. We will not be here on Monday. We'll be back 9:30 Tuesday morning. I know it's a long holiday, but still do not discuss the case with anyone. And hope have a safe and happy holiday and a good weekend. And we'll see you all on Tuesday morning at 9:30. Else today?
From the state, Your Honor.
Okay, we'll see everyone next week.
All right.